The stars above the Andarian cluster burned like distant fires, cold and untouchable, while below them floated the palace of Veilra, a vast structure of silver spires and shimmering crystal, humming with energy. Inside, silence had taken root, a silence so deep that it pressed against every wall and echoed through the hearts of those who served the Empress. Normally, her voice, a living wave of psychic resonance, guided the Empire. Every command, every warning, every law flowed through her tone, binding a civilization together. But now that voice was gone. The Empress herself hovered above the throne, her towering figure trembling with fear. Without her resonance, the psychic conduits that held the Empire stable were faltering. Distant colonies reported riots, rebel factions moved openly, and even the loyal guard whispered nervously among themselves. She could feel the Empire unraveling in every corner of her mind, a tapestry of order fraying thread by thread. And still she remained mute. The doors of the throne room opened with a hiss and Kalen Thorne stepped inside. A human. His arrival had been sudden, almost desperate. He was short by Veilran standards, his build lean, and his uniform far simpler than any of the elaborate garb surrounding him. But his eyes were sharp and alert, scanning every surface of the throne room as if he were solving a puzzle the size of a planet. Kalen had not come for glory. He had not come for riches. He came because humans had a unique trait the Veilrans did not: unpredictability. Where a Veilran mind could follow perfect logic, a human mind could improvise, adapt, and take risks. The Empress needed someone like that now. Kalen Thorne, the Empress projected in thought, the words trembling against the psychic silence, "Teach me to speak again and I will give you everything." There was no sound, only the pressure of her plea pushing against his mind. Kalen bowed slightly, keeping his own thoughts steady. He had no illusions. This was not a simple repair job. The Empress's psychic network was vast, intricate, and entirely alien. The storm that had stolen her voice was no ordinary disturbance. It had shattered her resonance patterns, breaking the connections that held her mind and empire together. One wrong move could end her life or collapse the palace itself. "I'll do what I can," Kalen replied, his voice a low hum in the chamber. "But I need time, tools, and access to your core systems." The Empress hesitated, then gestured, sending a psychic pulse toward the palace's control network. Machines stirred, lights blinked, and the air thickened with raw energy. Kalen moved quickly, already scanning the conduits with portable analyzers. He could feel the instability even before the readings confirmed it. The psychic lattice was fractured, sparks of resonance jumping unpredictably from one conduit to another. Any attempt to stabilize it without understanding the flow could trigger a feedback storm powerful enough to kill him instantly. He knelt beside a control console, fingers dancing over human design tools that interfaced with alien technology. Sparks of energy danced around him, each one a warning. His mind raced through possibilities, assessing risks, calculating outcomes. The palace was alive and it did not trust him. Every step forward was a test. Outside the throne room, murmurs grew into whispers, then into shouts. Rebellion was not just a threat, it was a reality. Colonies were rebelling, factions were organizing, and without the Empress's voice to hold them in check, the Empire's foundation was crumbling. Kalen could feel the tension in the air as sharply as the heat from the palace cores. Every second he delayed increased the chance of catastrophic failure. Kalen paused and took a deep breath. The humans he knew often thrived under pressure, and he was no exception. Fear would not guide him. Desperation would not guide him. Logic, ingenuity, and courage, the traits humans had survived with for millennia, would. He began interfacing with the palace's neural conduits, nanites clinging to crystal nodes and scanning resonance patterns. Tiny sparks flickered across his instruments, signaling fragments of the Empress's voice still alive but hidden, scattered, and unstable. The pattern was erratic, unpredictable. A human mind might manage it, a Veilran mind could not. A sudden flare of psychic energy threw Kalen backward, hitting the wall with a hard crack. He shook off the pain, eyes burning with determination. He had no time to recover. The lattice continued to collapse. If he failed, the Empress might never speak again, and the Empire could fall into chaos before reinforcements could arrive. Kalen climbed to his feet, gripping a portable stabilizer in one hand. His mind raced as he formulated a plan. Use human improvisation to mirror the Empress's fractured psychic signals, create a temporary bridge and restore continuity long enough to rebuild her voice. It was audacious. It was dangerous. But it was the only chance. The Empress drifted closer, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the palace. She had no words, but her presence was a storm of expectation and fear. Kalen met her gaze and nodded. I don't know if it will work, he thought, sending a cautious signal through the interface. But I will try. I will not let your voice fade completely. For the first time in hours, the air seemed to hold its breath. Sparks danced along the conduits, casting long shadows across the crystal floors. Somewhere deep in the palace, machinery hummed with anticipation. Kalen's hands shook slightly, but his resolve hardened. The first pulse of human-engineered resonance shot into the lattice. It flickered, hesitated, then began to adapt, responding unpredictably but steadily. The Empress's psychic silence quivered, hinting at the possibility of recovery. Kalen swallowed hard. This was only the beginning. One wrong move could end everything, but one right move could save the Empire. And as the palace trembled around him, he realized the impossible truth. Only a human could do this. Kalen's hands moved quickly over the alien console, fingers adjusting controls that pulsed with a strange, violet light. Each adjustment sent ripples through the psychic lattice, and each ripple risked catastrophic backlash. The fractured signals of the Empress's mind were chaotic, jumping between conduits with a speed no machine could fully predict. A Veilran engineer would have given up long ago. But humans thrived in chaos. Kalen gritted his teeth. This was his advantage. Keep steady, he muttered under his breath, not expecting an answer. The Empress floated nearby, silent, but her eyes burned with a mix of fear and hope. He had never met a being so powerful and yet so vulnerable. The thought of failure made his stomach tighten, but he forced it aside. Fear was a tool, not a master. He activated the nanite swarms, tiny machines designed to map resonance in real time. They scuttled across the crystal lattice, leaving trails of faint blue light. The patterns they revealed were stunning and terrifying. The Empress's psychic network was fractured into hundreds of micro-gaps. Each gap was a potential collapse point. One wrong pulse, and the feedback would tear through the palace, killing him and potentially silencing her forever. Kalen swallowed and focused. He remembered a lesson from his time in human war zones. When faced with overwhelming odds, improvisation was the weapon of choice. The Veilrans relied on their precision, their rigid logic. Humans relied on ingenuity, intuition, and courage under pressure. He began to rewrite the nanites' programming on the fly, giving them the ability to react unpredictably, just like a human mind might. The first trial sent sparks across the lattice. A ripple surged outward, stronger than he expected, and a burst of psychic energy knocked him off his feet. The floor vibrated beneath him, and a shard of crystal fell dangerously close. Kalen rolled to avoid it and slammed his hand onto the stabilizer console. His heart pounded, every nerve alive with tension. You can't do it, whispered a voice in his mind, almost like the palace itself doubting him. Kalen ignored it. Humans never quit when the impossible demanded action. He adjusted the resonance amplitude, sending a careful pulse into the lattice. It responded. Slightly. Almost like a heartbeat. It was not enough, but it was something. Kalen leaned closer, his face illuminated by the pulses of violet light. The nanites began bridging micro-gaps in the lattice, each one a tiny victory. He could feel the palace reacting, energy flowing differently, corridors humming with renewed vitality. But the deeper gaps remained stubborn, resistant, almost conscious in their defiance. Suddenly, alarms blared from the far end of the throne room. The palace security network detected psychic instability surging toward critical thresholds. The Veilran guards, tense and untrained in human methods, froze. Some muttered in confusion. Others drew energy blades, unsure whether they were defending the palace or preparing for collapse. Kalen had to act fast. He ripped open a secondary console and interfaced directly with the core systems. His human-designed patches integrated with alien technology, and for a moment, the lattice trembled as if alive. Sparks of psychic energy shot into the air, crackling and forming patterns that resembled a map of the fractured Empress. Kalen's fingers flew, sending real-time commands, recalibrating, adjusting timing down to fractions of a second. The Empress floated closer, her eyes wide. Though silent, she radiated tension. Kalen sensed her fear, her desperation, but also her faint trust. He had never felt more responsible. Every second mattered. The colonies beyond the palace walls were unstable. Every ripple he mismanaged could worsen the chaos. Minutes stretched like hours. The lattice was responding but unevenly. Some sectors stabilized, others flickered, threatening collapse. Kalen paused, analyzing the patterns, then smiled faintly. He had spotted a flaw. The microgaps weren't random. They followed a hidden rhythm, a subtle echo of her psychic signature. If he could mimic that rhythm with the nanites, the lattice could stabilize long enough to attempt full voice restoration. He adjusted the nanites to follow the pattern, sending pulses carefully synchronized with the Empress's latent resonance. The palace quaked, walls glowing with erratic light. A surge knocked him backward again, leaving his shoulder bruised. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward. This was the moment that would decide everything. A loud crack echoed through the main hall. One of the primary conduits flickered and threatened to collapse entirely. Kalen raced forward, manually rerouting the pulse with a human-engineered interface he had assembled in minutes. Sparks flew, light blinding him, and then slowly the conduit hummed steadily. Held. Kalen exhaled, barely noticing the burn on his hands from the energy discharge. Around him, the palace was still volatile, but the first tangible success had been achieved. The Empress's psychic silence shivered slightly, like a shadow of sound trying to return. Kalen knew it was only temporary, but it was proof. Human courage, intelligence, and determination could hold the impossible at bay. He straightened, scanning the lattice again. The fractures were still dangerous, but now they were patterns he could work with. This was the breakthrough. The Empire could survive, but only if he pushed forward, risking everything, using every ounce of human ingenuity. The Empress's eyes met his again. No words, only hope glimmering faintly. Kalen felt the weight of the moment. The palace could collapse at any second. The colonies were restless, ready to revolt. And still, a single human stood in the eye of the storm, ready to defy impossible odds. He clenched his jaw and whispered to himself, "One step closer." And with that, he prepared to dive deeper into the palace's psychic heart, knowing every action now carried the weight of an entire empire. Kalen stepped closer to the central conduit, the heart of the Empress's psychic lattice. The light there pulsed violently, erratic and dangerous, as though the palace itself was warning him away. He had stabilized some sections, yes, but the deeper layers remained fractured, too chaotic for even human-engineered nanites to fully bridge. He crouched beside a crystalline node, analyzing its fluctuating signals. The fractures weren't random. Kalen noticed subtle repetitions in the pulse, a rhythm, a pattern almost like breathing. His mind raced. The Empress's psychic lattice was not just a network of energy, it was her mind itself, mirrored across the palace. Every gap, every spike, every falter in resonance reflected her fear, her fatigue, her hesitation. Humans had instincts, intuition, and flexibility. Kalen realized he could use that. If he could mimic her mental rhythm, her pauses, her spikes, her hesitations, he could guide the fractured resonance back into alignment. It was risky. One misstep, and the lattice could collapse violently, tearing the palace apart. One miscalculation, and the Empress could be silenced forever. He took a deep breath. Fear was a luxury he could not afford. Courage, intelligence, and focus, the three tools humans wielded against impossible odds, had to carry him. Kalen began recalibrating the nanite swarms, programming them to mirror the microfluctuations in her psychic signals. Unlike a Veilran mind, he allowed for improvisation, uncertainty, and adaptation. The nanites became an extension of his own ingenuity. The first pulse surged through the lattice. Sparks danced across the crystalline surfaces, energy crackling in a way that made Kalen's teeth clench. The palace shuddered. He braced against the console, feeling the vibrations through his hands, through his chest. For a moment it seemed to hold, but then a sector of the lattice collapsed with a burst of psychic energy. Kalen was thrown to the floor, his shoulder striking a sharp edge. Pain flared, but he ignored it. Humans survived pain, humans adapted. He scrambled back to the interface. The collapse was not total. The nanites had slowed the spread, buying him precious seconds. Kalen adjusted the pulse timing, syncing it more precisely with the pattern he had discerned. The light of the conduit surged, brighter, steadier. This time it did not falter. A faint shimmer of the Empress's voice rippled through the chamber, barely perceptible but unmistakably there. Kalen's heart pounded. He could hear the hum of the restored resonance, like a whisper across a canyon. The Empress's psychic presence seemed to flicker with recognition, as though her mind was grasping for the bridge he had built. It was a fragile connection, but it was something no Veilran had managed in hours of failed attempts. Then another problem appeared. One of the deeper conduits, the main artery of the lattice, began oscillating dangerously. Its rhythm clashed violently with the nanite pulses, threatening to unravel everything Kalen had done. He could see it flickering on the interface, the numbers spiking toward critical failure. There was no time to think. Kalen did what humans did best, he acted. Using his interface, he injected a series of adaptive pulses directly into the conduit, letting the nanites respond to the fluctuations in real time. It was improvisation on the edge of disaster. Sparks shot from the nodes, arcs of violet energy slicing through the chamber like lightning. The air vibrated, and Kalen could feel the psychic backlash against his mind, but he held firm. Slowly, the conduit's oscillations stabilized. The lattice shimmered as though sighing in relief. Kalen staggered, wiping sweat from his brow. The Empress's voice shimmered again, stronger this time, like a faint echo trying to find its path back through the fractures. He could almost hear it, long drawn-out vibrations that held the weight of an empire. But Kalen knew it was not enough. The lattice was still fractured, still unstable. He needed a bold move, something no human or Veilran had dared attempt. The fractures followed her psychic signature, yes, but there was one sector that had resisted all stabilization, the central core. If he could bridge that core, even temporarily, he could create a conduit for her voice to flow again. It was audacious. It was dangerous. But it was the only path. He took a steadying breath, fingers trembling slightly as he accessed the core interface. Every spark, every vibration, every pulse of the lattice was amplified here. One wrong signal could overload the entire palace. Kalen ignored the warnings in his mind. Humans had survived far worse with nothing but courage and intellect. He injected a controlled pulse into the core, letting it mimic the Empress's own psychic rhythm. The palace quaked violently, shards of crystal bouncing across the floors, but Kalen held the line. A sudden flare erupted from the core, brighter than anything he had seen. The force threw him to the ground again, and the air shimmered with raw psychic energy. For a heartbeat, it seemed the palace would collapse. Then the light steadied. A ripple of the Empress's voice emerged, faint but unmistakable, threading through the lattice like a lifeline. Kalen gasped, exhausted but exhilarated. He had done it, partially. The bridge held, the core stabilized, and her voice had begun to return. He could see the faint shimmer of psychic energy spreading outward, reaching conduits that had been dead for hours. But the lattice was still fragile. One misstep, one poorly timed pulse, and everything could fail again. Kalen pushed himself upright, determination blazing. The Empress's eyes met his again, wide and searching, and he knew she understood. Humans, fragile as they seemed, could do the impossible. The palace trembled around him, the risk still immense, but a single truth had emerged. Courage, intelligence, and the willingness to act when all odds are against you could shape the fate of an empire. Kalen had proven it once, but the true test, the full restoration of the Empress's voice, was still ahead. And as he prepared for the next phase, a new surge of psychic energy crackled through the palace, brighter and more violent than ever before. Kalen realized the battle was far from over. This time, failure would mean more than silence. It could mean death. He swallowed hard, tightened his grip on the interface, and whispered to himself, "Time to finish what we started." The palace shook violently, walls quivering with psychic energy that threatened to snap the crystalline spires like glass. Kalen Thorne stood at the heart of the central conduit, sweat stinging his eyes, hands trembling from the strain of holding the human-engineered interface steady. The partial restoration had worked, but only partially. The Empress's voice shimmered faintly, fragile as a candle in the wind. One wrong move and the lattice could collapse entirely, crushing him and her alike. He clenched his jaw. There was no turning back. Humans survived the impossible because they acted when others hesitated. Kalen drew a deep breath, feeling the raw energy pulse around him, crackling across the crystalline floors. Sparks arced through the air, purple and gold streaks of power that made the chamber seem alive, almost sentient. The Empress floated above, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. She could feel the risk, but she trusted him even if she did not fully understand him. Kalen's mind raced. The fractures in the lattice followed her psychic rhythm, but some gaps were too wide for the nanites alone to bridge. He would have to merge his human-generated pulses directly with the core, becoming the bridge himself. It was dangerous. A misalignment could fry his nervous system, sending a surge through the palace strong enough to kill anyone nearby. But it was the only chance to restore her voice fully. He steadied his hands, locked his thoughts on the pattern he had observed, the subtle rises and falls of the Empress's psychic signature. Then, with a deep breath, he initiated the final sequence. A surge of human-engineered resonance shot into the core. Sparks flew violently, throwing him backward. Pain flared through his shoulder and spine, but he pushed against it. Humans endured pain, humans adapted. Humans survived because they refused to quit. The lattice flared like a storm, energy tearing through the chamber. Kalen could feel it striking at his mind, forcing him to focus every ounce of his attention, every instinct honed through a lifetime of problem-solving, improvisation, and courage. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, and the light from the conduits danced across his vision in jagged, blinding flashes. He extended his hands, letting the interface guide the pulses, adjusting in real time to every fluctuation. The nanites followed, bridging microgaps, amplifying the human signal, reacting unpredictably but perfectly in step with his improvisation. It was chaos controlled, disorder tamed by courage and ingenuity. The Empress's eyes widened as the lattice responded. A ripple of her voice emerged, faint at first, trembling like a newborn star. Kalen adjusted the interface again, deepening the connection, merging his human-generated resonance with the core. The chamber shook violently, shards of crystal bouncing off walls and floors. Sparks leapt, striking dangerously close. Pain shot through his hands, but he clenched the interface tighter. Failure was not an option. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a shimmer, faint and golden, stretched across the lattice. The Empress's voice grew stronger, clearer, threading through the palace like sunlight piercing a storm. Kalen pushed harder, matching her psychic rhythm with perfect improvisation, letting human creativity guide the alien network. The palace quaked again, louder this time, and Kalen was knocked to his knees. The surge threatened to throw him entirely, but he stayed grounded, letting the interface become an extension of his will. Sweat poured from his brow, his lungs burned, and every nerve screamed for him to stop. But he did not. Humans thrived in moments like this, when courage outweighed fear, when intelligence turned chaos into victory. Then suddenly the lattice stabilized. The surge subsided, the light softened, and the shards of energy that had danced wildly moments before now flowed smoothly through the conduits. Kalen gasped, leaning on the console for support. The Empress's voice echoed across the chamber, full, resonant, commanding. The sound washed over him, vibrating through the palace, carrying authority, warmth, and life. She spoke aloud for the first time in hours. "It is done." Her voice was powerful, clear, the psychic resonance threading through the entire empire. Kalen felt it as a physical pulse in the air, a wave of energy that seemed to steady every unstable colony, every trembling faction. Order had returned, not by alien mastery alone, but by a human's courage and ingenuity. The Empress descended slowly, her eyes glistening. "You risked everything for me. For my people," she said. Her words trembled, not from weakness but from awe. "No Veilran could have done what you did." Kalen shook his head, exhausted but smiling faintly. "I only did what humans do best," he said, voice hoarse. "We face impossible odds. We act. We survive. And sometimes we save worlds." The Empress studied him, then gestured toward the core. The nanites and interface pulsed once more, stabilizing completely. "You have not only restored my voice," she said softly, "but reminded my empire why courage matters. Why life matters." Kalen looked around the chamber, at the stabilized lattice, at the calm returning to the palace corridors. His chest heaved, heart pounding, and he realized the weight of what had just happened. One human mind, one act of courage, had held an entire civilization together. The colonies would thrive, the factions would hesitate, and the empire would survive. All because a single human had dared to act where others could not. He stumbled back, letting the interface power down. Sparks faded, the violet light softened into a gentle glow. The Empress floated closer, reaching out. Kalen met her gaze. No words were necessary. Both understood the truth: the impossible had been done. Humans had triumphed, not by strength alone, but by ingenuity, courage, and determination. Outside, the first reports of calm began to reach the palace. Riots slowed, colonies stabilized, and for the first time in hours, hope returned. The Empress's voice carried across the stars, restored by a human who refused to quit. Kalen sank to the floor, exhausted, bruised, and trembling, but alive. Around him, the palace settled, humming with life once more. He had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. Not because he was stronger than the Veilrans, not because he was faster, but because he was human. And as he looked at the Empress, fully restored and radiant, Kalen knew the truth humans had always understood. Courage could bend the universe and ingenuity could conquer the impossible. The battle was over, but the legend had just begun. Kalen sat slumped against the cool crystal floor of the palace, muscles trembling, mind racing from hours of strain. The Empress's voice echoed through the halls, strong and unwavering, a living force that steadied the empire. The palace itself seemed to sigh in relief, vibrations softening, lights returning to calm pulses. Every corridor, every chamber, every conduit thrummed with life again. He had done it. The Empress approached him, floating with grace and authority, yet her eyes held a new warmth, a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Kaelin Thorne," she said aloud, her voice rich and resonant, "you have not merely restored my voice. You have reminded all Vailrans of what it means to be courageous. What it means to act when hope seems lost." Kaelin shook his head, still catching his breath. "I just did what humans do. We face impossible odds and try anyway." His voice was hoarse but steady. He had learned that fear existed to be faced, and risk existed to be met head-on. That was the human way. The Empress smiled faintly. "You risked your life for me, for all of Vailra. I have lived centuries and seen the finest Vailrans falter. None could have matched your ingenuity or bravery." She paused, letting her words settle. "You are a human, yes, and that alone made the difference." Kaelin's gaze swept the palace. Sparks of residual energy flickered through the lattice, but the core systems hummed steadily. Colonies and outposts had begun reporting calm. Rebel movements slowed, the more unstable factions hesitated, and even neighboring star systems paused in awe. One human had stood in the storm of psychic chaos and held an empire together. He remembered the moments of near failure, the bursts of energy that threw him to the floor, the fractures in the lattice that could have ended everything, the screaming of machines and the silent pleadings of the Empress. Every second had been a choice: fear or courage, retreat or action. Humans were fragile, yes, but fragile minds often made the boldest leaps. The Empress extended her hand toward him. "Kaelin, you have not only restored me but changed the course of our civilization. We are forever in your debt." Her psychic signature brushed against his mind, a gentle, warm wave. Kaelin felt it, not as a command or order, but as a recognition of what he had risked and what he had achieved. Humans, Kaelin thought, often underestimated themselves. They measured strength in muscle or raw energy, but true strength was courage, ingenuity, and the will to act when all odds were against you. That lesson had saved an entire empire. The palace doors opened behind him, and Vailran nobles, advisors, and generals entered. They paused, eyes wide at the human who had stabilized the Empress and her empire. Whispers of awe spread quickly. "A human did this? Impossible? He is extraordinary." Kaelin's name would echo across their halls for generations. The Empress turned back to the crowd. "Let it be known," she commanded, her voice now vibrant and unstoppable, "that a human, Kaelin Thorne, has acted with courage, intelligence, and selflessness beyond measure. He saved Vailra when all hope seemed lost." The court fell silent, then erupted in quiet murmurs of respect. Kaelin felt a surge of something he had not expected: recognition. Not for glory, not for reward, but for what he had risked. The human mind, the human heart, had held an empire together. Later, Kaelin walked the palace corridors with the Empress. The energy fields were calm now, the lattice fully restored, humming a quiet rhythm that echoed across the cluster. "Will they always need humans like you?" she asked, voice soft, almost contemplative. Kaelin smiled faintly. "No," he said. "But they'll never forget what humans can do. Sometimes, when the impossible arises, courage and ingenuity are enough." The Empress nodded, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. "You have reminded me," she said, "that strength is not measured by power alone, but by the will to act when everything is against you. You are human, and that is why you succeeded." Kaelin felt something shift inside him, a quiet pride, not arrogance, but certainty. Humans were fragile, yes. But when faced with impossible odds, their courage could bend worlds. Their minds could solve what others deemed unsolvable. Their hearts could endure what others feared. He had been tested, and he had emerged victorious, not because he was the strongest but because he was human. Outside the palace, the empire began to stabilize. The colonies returned to order. Factions that had threatened civil war hesitated before acting again. News of Kaelin's actions spread faster than any decree. A human had saved the Empress, had held the empire together with nothing but ingenuity, courage, and determination. Across the stars, other human pilots, engineers, and explorers would hear the story and know it was possible. One human could change the fate of worlds. The Empress watched him with deep respect. "Kaelin Thorne," she said, her voice both firm and gentle, "you have not only restored my voice but restored hope to Vailra. You are a hero in every sense." Kaelin nodded, exhaustion and relief washing over him. He had faced impossible odds, survived, and triumphed. He had done what humans always did best: stand when others faltered, think when others hesitated, act when others feared. And in that moment, as the palace hummed quietly around him and the stars shimmered above, he realized something that no Veilran or alien could teach him. Humans, fragile and small as they seemed, could accomplish what even the most powerful civilizations could not. Courage, ingenuity, and determination were weapons stronger than any psychic resonance or alien technology. Kalen smiled faintly, looking toward the horizon. The Empire was safe. The Empress's voice was restored. And somewhere deep inside him, he knew this was only the beginning. Humans had arrived in the stars, and they would not be forgotten. The legend of Kalen Thorne, the human who saved an empire, was just beginning to spread across the galaxy. And every whisper, every awe-filled voice, would carry the truth. Humans, though small, could face the impossible and emerge victorious.